The culture's gone crazy, media's gone mad, and reason has become repugnant. Here, we focus on facts and how to fight back. Tonight, we'll be talking about red states versus blue states, and something we've been seeing on the rise recently, right flight. This is a term to describe the great migration of people moving from blue America to red America. We've seen Americans move in the past to neighborhoods for a variety of reasons, but now what we're seeing isn't so much intra-regional, but much larger. People aren't just moving to a neighboring city or neighboring town, but are moving to entirely different regions of the country. And this isn't just a migration of one or two people. This is a flood. We all know someone who has moved to Texas, Florida, or Tennessee, and this makes sense. So let's dive into why. Let's start with COVID policies. People realized in the last year or two that this whole lockdown thing was lasting much longer than expected, and that governors were handling the situation completely differently. While Gavin Newsom shut down restaurants, bars, gyms, even churches, and so on, he hit up the restaurant French Laundry for his own enjoyment. While Nancy Pelosi spoke about the need for lockdowns and social distancing, she broke the rules in California and got her hair done at a salon when no one else could. Meanwhile, in states like Florida, Ron DeSantis led the way in the path to reopening, with many other red states following suit, like Governor Abbott following his lead in Texas. People saw that these lockdowns were not only perpetual, but were a means for their leaders to take away individual freedom. While all of this started out as a safety issue, it quickly morphed into what many in blue states believe is the new normal. Of course, not everyone can work from home. Only those with white-collar jobs can do that. And of course, they're often the ones in favor of lockdowns and social distancing. But many with blue-collar jobs, those in the service industry, they weren't in agreement. They were forced to be on unemployment, relied on government checks, and many realized that they just can't sustain a life in this environment for months on end. We've seen people of all incomes moving to red states. Whether you're a family that's ready to sell your home in California in exchange for a larger home in Tennessee, or you're in need of an environment where you're free to operate your business and go about your life, there are many compelling reasons to move. If you're a small business owner in a Democratic-run city, you have no control. It's the powers that be that decide whether or not you're open. They decide if you lose your life savings you put into this. Not only are red states more attractive when it comes to a time of COVID and whether or not your state will likely be on lockdown, but red and blue states also have completely different fiscal policies. There are lower tax rates in red states. This has been the case for a long time, but as COVID has hit a lot of people hard, this makes a big difference. Now that we've lived through this shock of a global pandemic, it's been a wake-up call for people to reevaluate their lives and look exactly at where their money is going. When you see how much you're paying our big government, it's maddening. I live in New York and have to in order to do this show, so I pay much more in taxes here than I would if I lived in Texas, for example, where my family and my husband's family live. But even aside from taxes, red states also have less regulation and less red tape, less of a burden put on small business owners. You have a much higher rate of success in a red state, since in blue states, laws almost never favor the business owner. Similarly, in New York, for example, laws almost never favor the landlord. They almost always favor the tenant. So if your tenant doesn't pay his rent, you can't really evict him. It could take months, even years, for the authorities to step in. This is not the case in Texas. Let's also look at crime rates. In 2020, we saw crime rates in Democrat-run cities so high, we haven't seen this kind of crime since the 1960s and 70s. Crime has always been high in Democrat-run cities, but it spiked to be even higher due to rioting after the death of George Floyd, ongoing Black Lives Matter protests, which still happen today, Antifa violence, and just a general rise in daily crime. By this I mean a rise in shootings, murder, burglary, car theft. According to the New York Daily News, New York City ended 2020 with a 97% jump in shootings and a 45% increase in murder. Some officials blame bail reform and claim that crime was made worse by the release of jailed prisoners during the COVID-19 crisis. For fear of overcrowding and health concerns, prisoners were set free for other citizens to deal with. Fast forward to mid-2021, and we see that crime rose 30.4% in April of 2021 compared to April 2020. A disturbing fact. Baltimore, Maryland, another blue area, isn't faring much better. We're halfway through 2021 and Baltimore is on track to hit 300 homicides for the 7th consecutive year. Rarely do you see this, but in Oakland, California, riddled with crime, we saw a big rise in crime in the last year. The Democrat city voted to defund the police in the wake of rioting, but found themselves quickly regretting it. As Oakland saw murder on the rise, carjacking on the rise, and more, the people had enough. Not everyone can up and move. We need resources, said Chief LaRon Armstrong at a press conference. Those millions of dollars were resources. They were officers. On April 12, 2021, the Oakland City Council voted unanimously to reallocate $10 million to restore funding to the city's police and fire department. At least some of these people are waking up and seeing the consequences of these policies. Meanwhile, Republican-run areas have much lower crime rates. Florida, for example, run by Ron DeSantis, saw an overall decrease in crime from 2019 to 2020, even while Democratic cities were getting worse. Factoring in Florida's population growth in 2020, overall crime in Florida was down 15.7% in 2020. Why are Republican-run areas safer? One reason is many have guns. This acts as a deterrent. If you're looking to pull a stunt, you'd think twice beforehand since you'd likely be shot pretty quickly. In New York City, where I live temporarily, I can't carry a weapon. But when I move to Texas, I will definitely be carrying. Republican areas also have judges and prosecutors who value law and order. Meanwhile, in cities like New York and San Francisco, you have left-wing prosecutors and judges who leave hardened criminals with lighter sentences. And of course, the squad of AOC and others are pushing defund the police, and some cities have reallocated funding away from law enforcement. But more than that, it's not just about the funding, but the messaging. The left is demoralizing the police, and many of their superiors in these left-wing areas scare the policemen to basically indicate, hey, don't intervene in a crime, don't stick your neck out, we don't want any trouble here. Better to just let crime ensue, and if you're a policeman yourself hearing this, why would you risk your life and your badge in order to protect someone if you know the city will be out for blood, your blood? And defund the police rhetoric doesn't just demoralize the police, but embolden the criminals. They know they can get away with more now. Look at Portland and how bad that is. Look at the autonomous zones in places like Seattle. Talk about lawlessness. I now want to touch on homelessness. This problem is getting much worse in Democratic-run cities. If you live in a red area, this likely doesn't affect your daily life very much, but in Democratic-run cities, you can't walk on the streets oftentimes because homeless are living there, there are discarded needles on the ground, men are exposing themselves, peeing in front of you. I couldn't imagine even taking a young child for a walk in the streets of San Francisco. Those who live in this city wouldn't dream of it, not through the streets at least. While the water is beautiful there, people are much safer and happier in Republican areas. This homelessness issue is one of the reasons Californians hate Gavin Newsom. Homelessness has gotten much worse under his watch, and it's not just in San Francisco and LA. Those are hotbeds, but severe homelessness has spread into Riverside, many suburbs, and so on. And residents are fed up. In Republican areas, this is rarely an issue that infringes upon your daily life. While Gavin Newsom is in hot water, Larry Elder, the Black Republican thinker and powerhouse, is a political commentator but hasn't held political office before. Yet he's running neck and neck with Newsom. Let's hope Larry Elder wins big. If he does, we may just see California turn around, or at least he would put some sort of a stop to it going completely down the tubes. So, what do we make of all of this? Life is clearly better in the red states for the average American, and Democrats know it. That's why they're moving to red states themselves. It is sometimes said that imitation is a form of flattery, but so is migration. If people want to migrate to certain places in a pattern, there's a reason why. Texas, Tennessee, Florida, homes are flying and people are offering above asking price. We could dive into that deeper in a whole other episode, but this is clear. We are living through a time of red flight, the Great Red Migration. Of course, the biggest concern is, will these people take their politics with them? Some who are moving from California to Texas, for example, are conservative. But those who aren't, Hollywood actors and so on, who love Austin, it's concerning. Will people realize why they're moving to these red areas, and by voting red, they can preserve what makes that red area great? Or will they see how much they love a red state, but then keep voting blue just like they did before? If that happens, before we know it, we'll see a pattern of conservatives making an area great and liberals moving in to ruin it. Then conservatives have to move again and make another area great. The liberals follow and the cycle continues. But how long can this go on?